And do you know why they have to put the aluminium into the vaccines?
Because if they don't have the vaccines don't induce the correct immune response,
right.
Full stop.
And do you know why? Though it's really interesting, because those proteins that are part of the viruses and the bacteria, there's a researcher named Daria Kanduk. She's from Italy, and she's written numerous papers on the fact that our amino acid sequences in our proteins in our bodies, in our brains, in our myelin, in our joints, are identical to the amino acid sequences in the different microbes. And there's a reason for that, because our immune system would be overreacting to everything. It has to do with teaching it's very difficult to explain, but we get colonized with bacteria. We live in a world of viruses. We can't always be overreacting. Right. And part of the reason that we can't be overreacting is because we're so similar to these microbes. So because we're so similar, we actually have tolerance to them. Because we have tolerance to our own bodies, we have tolerance to the microbes. So scientists realized that. They started injecting tetanus toxoid in the 1940s, 1950s, and they saw that the soldiers weren't really responding that well to them. So they by accident stumbled upon aluminium, because it's basically, it stirs up the immune system. So they put that in alongside, and then you end up with this inflammatory storm that overrides that primal, natural, normal infant immunity plan, blueprint, that is anti-inflammatory. Everything about a newborn, the breast milk, the stem cells that come out through the mother's breast milk, the stem cells that come through the placenta, is designed to keep that baby in an anti-inflammatory stance. So when people want to talk about different vaccine ingredients, I push that away in a sense, and I go, no, this isn't about vaccine ingredients. This is about what vaccines are, whether it's got aluminium or mercury, or it's just a plain old MMR with a live viral vaccine. It stirs up inflammation. Inflammation is a bad thing to do to a growing fetus, and it's a bad thing to do to a newborn baby. And it defies the natural program of that immune system. End of story. I don't care what's in the vaccine. Don't eliminate aluminum and say everything's going to be okay. It's not. Don't eliminate mercury and say everything's going to be okay. It's not. Don't take away measles and say everything's going to be okay. It's not. Every vaccine is designed to stir up the immune system in one way or another.
So the parents that say, these vaccines have injured my child, and this is what I've noticed, and then they get fobbed off by their pediatrician and doctors saying, there's no correlation here, vaccines are completely safe. What would you say to those doctors, having had the parent go in and say, this is what I've seen? Because all of these names on here are reports and stories from the parent.
Right.
And the doctors don't believe the parent, and they're saying, it's all safe.
Right. Well, I think the first thing I would do is I would walk them around the bus. And I would have them read the walls on the bus, and I would say, this is a very small sampling of part of America. Very small sampling of the reality out there. Are you saying that all of these parents are what they call the coincidence dragon? That this torturous thing that is, bothering the World Health Organization and the CDC and these poor doctors that are just trying to get these vaccines into people to save public health? No. I tell doctors that they need to realize that they have been passively brainwashed. We hear over and over as we're growing up as children, and as we're going through college or whatever training programs, Sabin, Salk, the polio vaccine, the greatest miracles in modern medicine. We hear this and we believe it. And the reason Roman and I wrote Dissolving Illusions was because we were startled when we started to read the history and the facts about what really went on back during the smallpox vaccination era, which were rebels, there were rallies, there were whole cities that were rebelling against this vaccine because kids were getting sick, people were dying, they were still getting smallpox, some of the worst cases of smallpox. And that there's been an anti-vaccination movement since there have been vaccines. And guess what? Doctors have actually been part of that anti-vaccination movement. Doctors who originally started out saying, yeah, smallpox is a terrible disease, I'm so glad we have something that we can use for it. And then they watched and they said, oh no, this is definitely not the answer. I'm not going to stand by this anymore. And we quote these doctors, these medical doctors, these men of, respect from back 200 years ago, 100 years ago. We talk about what was actually in those vaccines, how they were made. And if doctors understood the real history of polio, the way I described it and Roman wrote about in Dissolving Illusions, if they were actually open-minded enough to stop believing what they think and actually read and try to find their own facts, and this is the problem, is that they'll realize that there's a crack in this illusion that they're seeing. And then they'll start to see more. And guess what happens? After you start to see the problems with vaccination, you sit there going, but why? do this, and why would they do this? And then you start to notice other things in medicine. That's what happened to me. I started to notice that some of my, gold standard practices in nephrology weren't all they were cracked up to be. And then I started to realize that if I tried to do things alternatively, that there were some doctors who would purposely send their patients to me there, but most of the doctors would be, what is she doing? So, I'm just asking that doctors look into their own education and realize that the pharmaceutical industry and the American Medical Association doesn't have the most pristine reputation, that they've actually been in control of medical education for a very long time, and that it's a very difficult thing to wake up to, but that it's a responsibility. If you're feeling that you have personal responsibility towards your patients, then you have the personal responsibility in this day and age to actually investigate things on your own. I'm not saying believe me and don't believe them. I'm not saying believe them and don't believe me. I'm saying just what I say to parents is please read about both sides and think about it on your own. Come up with your own conclusions rather than believing the sound bites.
I think my favourite line, I've got some questions for you, and we'll do it tomorrow because I know Patrick can't move while we've got the lights on, so he's waiting to go. My favourite line is the most simple line in the book, but I love it, and I wrote it down. It says, you can never assume that doctors really know what they're doing. Full stop.
Absolutely.
And that,
I've given out a lot
everything up.
I'm a very highly educated, conscientious medical doctor, and in the course of my career, out of total ignorance, I've given out some really bad advice, and that's not unique to me. We hear stories every day. We heard stories over dinner tonight about the kind of advice that doctors give when they don't know what to do. And part of the problem is, as doctors are put on the spot, you have to fix me. Please tell me what I need to do. And they start to make it up as they go. And when they start hearing the absurd answers that are coming out of their mouths, I think that's when they really have another responsibility to say, okay, well, I just fudged that. I need to really go home and start to think about this. Practicing conventional medicine is actually very easy. I know when I started looking into other types of medicine to practice and really listening to patients, it takes a lot longer to actually listen and think and start talking about building from the ground up nutrition and good habits. That takes time to do. It's much easier to write a prescription and get somebody out of your office. And if that's the way you want to practice medicine, that's all you're doing. You're practicing medicine. You're practicing. You're not healing. I don't know about you doctors, but I went into the field of medicine to be able to bring people to higher levels of health. And I don't think that the medical system is actually designed to do that as it stands today.
It is, guys, you just have, I know the first book's good as well, so you give them to every family member this Christmas, every
But Polly
teacher.
read the book, and that's what's unique, because a lot of people interview me but haven't actually read the book, but Polly actually read the book. What did you think, Polly?
They know I read the book because I was telling them every single night that I was reading it.
Well, there it is, you guys.
It is brilliant, and I said to them, you will, it's a fantastic education if you have to go into hospital. It took me up a notch. I would not have known, even though I feel like I know it all because I've been interviewing for 19 years, you taught me something completely different. I would be much more vigilant in hospital, much more vigilant with other doctors outside of the vaccine doctors that I'm used to.
Yeah.
And just question everything.
Absolutely. And write everything down, keep a timeline, videotape, audio tape, get as many records as possible, because not only can it remind you of what you need to know, but you've also are saving a record. But, the thing is that, I wrote this book for parents. I didn't write it I've given up pretty much on trying to convert the medical profession. There's only a few of them, and there are millions of parents out there. And parents are disenfranchised and disempowered. And what I realized in my journey in and out of the conventional medical system is that I got beat up by the medical system. I was kind of marginalized for basically seeking the truth and trying to do things sustainable health, towards sustainable health. And I was doubted, and I was, and there was a short period of time where I was going, well, maybe I am wrong about this, so maybe I am. And then I would start to hear the parents' stories, and then I would start to hear other stories of people, how they got out of the system, how they healed themselves outside the system and never inside the system. And I just said, darn it, I'm not wrong. I'm absolutely right, and I'm just going to keep going with this. And I imagine that if someone like me with, a degree in physics and a degree in medicine and a subspecialty, a professor of medicine who's teaching, can sit here and be intimidated by the doubters, the ignoramuses in the medical
Yeah.
system who will tell a woman like this that organic food can hurt her children, that they should go back to processed food. It's kind of like, I can only imagine what parents feel like when this happens. So if that's how it was for me, I can only imagine what it's like for a parent. And so this book really, I think, should help parents, because what they're going to realize is the stuff that Forrest Moretti talks about the limited knowledge, the lack of education of medical doctors. I detail it pretty well in here. I take you by the hand, and I take you through medical school with me.
And
I
it's
take
not
you through residency.
And also, but please know this, people, it's not difficult to understand. You know, I have attention deficit disorder, whatever. I don't know, I diagnosed myself with it. But this kept me gripped the whole way through, because it's lots of stories, and you keep it, you go back to your own personal issues, which is, I mean, there's some really sad moments in there as well. And then there's horrific bullying moments where you're bullied by your bosses or other doctors, and you stand firm on it, and you're really honest in your realization that, okay, maybe I should stand up to this doctor, or maybe. It's really fascinating, and it's a real education, and it's really sad. You go to personal things like the death of your father, and and the death of your mother, and I really related to those. I mean, my dad was my best friend. I watched him die. Horrific. And then maybe we have kind of different relationships with our mothers. I got the whole thing, and then you talk about your faith, and it's, guys, you're going to love it. You are going to love it, because it's an education. You'll cry and you'll laugh.
It's true. You will cry and you'll laugh. I cried and laughed when I wrote it, and you know, it's a much easier read than Dissolving Illusions. It reads more like a novel, and you know, most people on Amazon, the reviews say that they couldn't put it down. And you know, I actually, my arm was twisted into writing this book by a very dear friend who used to listen to me talk about my experiences, and I never looked back and put them all together in a way that would turn into this in my head. But once I started writing, because this person said, you need to sit down and write this all out, because people are going to love it and they're going to benefit from reading it,